Okay, it's 7 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Clayton City Hall. I'm David Gibson. I'm the city manager. With us tonight is Anna Crane, our Director of Planning and Development Services, and Matt Malik, our Director of Public Works. A lot of familiar faces in the crowd from the public meetings we've had at the high school. We also had a meeting in this room that was probably, gosh, I don't even know now, 9 months maybe, 6 to 9 months ago. And then I remember having a meeting with a subset of you down in the conference room on the first floor, and that was probably 5 months ago or so. I don't even know. It's all kind of a blur. I know we've had lots of public meetings, but it's good to see you all again this evening. And the purpose of tonight is to go through those draft overlay provisions with you, talk about the parameters a little bit, and get your feedback on those individual items. So I'm going to start with kind of a general overview, but then we're going to kind of go to the detailed section and walk through each of those components. So I think most of you are pretty familiar with this project, but I always like to start again with the purpose of zoning, which is seeking to regulate the use, the intensity, and bulk. And so when we talk about use, it's very simple. That's how the land or the buildings are being utilized on the site, be it residential, commercial, office, institution, whatever that may be. And then, the subcategories. So if we're talking about commercial, are we talking about, retail or a bank? In this particular case, if it's institutional, is it an office building? Is it an athletic use? Those types of things. The intensity of the land use. So you can have varying intensity within those use categories. So for instance, residential is a great way to look at it. You have different degrees of residential with different intensities. So single family residential use is the lowest intensity you're going to find in residential, all the way up to a high-rise multifamily building like we have here that generate a lot of parking demand, a lot of traffic. You have a lot of residents all on that same footprint. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about intensity. And finally, the bulk of the use. So how much of the site are the actual buildings, the physical characteristics taking up? What is their height? How close are they to the property lines? Those types of things. The current zoning for the area we're talking about, and today with Tuscany, because you're adjacent on the south side of the project site, we're really going to focus on the Big Bend overlay. If folks want to talk about South 40, we can talk about that a little bit, but today we really want to focus on the immediately adjacent area to you. You can see that everything is zoned single family residential. That's the yellow color that you see here. So the same zoning for Hillcrest and the surrounding neighborhoods, Tuscany as well, Tuscany Park, is the same regulatory framework that we use to regulate the institutions. And so again, that's what we're trying to get away from because the way we've been doing it is regulating institutions with single family zoning through the use of conditional use permits. And so what we're trying to do is go to an overlay system, and the overlay system basically replaces that single family family zoning there, but it sets out all of the rules in the municipal code, in the ordinance, very specifically about how that use can take place on that particular site. It is tailored for that site. So right now, and we'll walk through some of the specific parameters, it's kind of wide open what the institutions can do using that single family zoning and conditional use permits. We just say that we allow universities and their accessories on those sites. So that's completely wide open. Whatever the university can think of, they can apply to put it there. Yes. Yeah, so this allows us to get much more detailed into the use characteristics. The urban design is really focusing a lot on the architecture, on the bulk of those particular buildings, where we really want to get into use characteristics and get more specific into things like noise and lighting and other parameters that you typically wouldn't see in an urban design district. Great question, though. So when we look at building an overlay district, and we have some of these within the city, preserving neighborhood character and quality of life for nearby residents is paramount. That's what's in our code. That's what we're trying to do. And we're considering three primary concerns that we hear, not just with this, but really with any land use, our major development project that we have in the city, which is residents that are adjacent to it typically don't want to see it, they don't want to hear it, and they don't want traffic or parking in their neighborhoods. Usually, if you can solve for those three things, you're in pretty good shape, where whatever that use is or that development is shouldn't be causing concerns for the adjacent residents. So those are the types of things that again, we're seeking to regulate or mitigate in this case. So we'll go through and examples, if I don't want to see it, would be things like building height, We'll talk about transition zones and lighting. If you don't want to hear it, we can put decibel limits in there. The setbacks are important. The further they are away with the sound, the better the situation will be. And the transition zones come into play there as well. And then finally, don't want traffic or parking in neighborhoods. We can control the access points for it, and then also make sure that we have ample site parking on the site. So the project, generally, just to get your bearings again, the Danforth campus is up here, circling that. That's actually outside of the city limits. That is in unincorporated St. Louis County. That's the main campus for Washington University. Just to the south of that, within the city of Clayton, at the corner of Forsyth and Big Bend, is the South 40. So that's a blend of dormitories, residence halls, you've got dining halls, and those types of uses on that particular site to support the activity on the Danforth campus. Then you have the Concordia Seminary property, and to the south of that, you've got the CVC site. South Campus, as it's known in Washington University. The first step of all of this development, because it's all phased and it's all tied together, is this housing relocation on the Concordia site. So Concordia would take that housing that you're very familiar with in Tuscany that's up against Big Bend, move that to the central portion of their campus, thereby freeing up that space for Washington University then to take their athletic uses that are located in the South 40 at that intersection. So there's a baseball and a softball field, along with the athletic uses that you have at the South 40 campus, and they would move those onto this new Big Bend overlay, which is essentially the western portion of the Concordia site. Yes. Correct. That's correct. So Fontbonn's going to continue to utilize that campus until the end of summer 2025. Washington University doesn't have solid plans for that at this point in time. So we thought it would be premature to build it into an overlay for athletic uses, not knowing what the end use would be for the Fontbonn site. So if that's going to continue to be a mix of dormitories and classroom space and offices the way it is right now, it wouldn't be appropriate to draw that into an overlay that's tailored for, again, athletic recreation type facilities. Yes. Well, here's what happens. If we don't go forward with this process, I would anticipate that Washington University applies to do this very thing there with conditional use permits under the current zoning. And I hate to speak for Washington University, but I think their intention is to utilize this site the way we're going to talk about it this evening. And they can do that under the current framework. So, we could start to have discussions about changing the zoning real quick and trying to do something differently. I think we would have permits that we would have to consider before we would even get to that point. Yes. You. They can say no, but they're going to have to prove that there's no way to mitigate any potential nuisances from the uses proposed. They would have to prove, well, depending on how far it went, correct.
Want to limit it, right? Like we can say, like, if you want to do these things, these are all of the limitations. And the limitations, I mean, from my perspective as your elected official, they can be as extreme as you want. Like, like, do you think 80 feet isn't enough and you want 120 or 200? I mean, I don't know. Let's talk about it, right? But like, we are not, like, it is not legal and it would be really poor governance for the Board of Aldermen to suggest that we would move forward and just say, nothing can be developed here. We would get sued and we would lose. Is-
According to the current R2, your section 410, 790 zone.
So the issue we have is the fact that we list this as a conditional use. And a conditional use, the underlying assumption is that that use is permitted. That use is okay, that use is appropriate. However, we recognize that there may be some elements associated with that use that may cause concern for the neighbors, and you may want to mitigate through conditions you put on that approval. But the underlying assumption is that the use is permitted. And we've already established that we believe a university and all of their associated uses within their campuses are appropriate for this particular site. Our zoning code says that right now. And so that's where it gets really hard to deny it, because it's listed as a conditional use, as something that is permitted there. And we're saying, in order to put it on that site, we want to take a hard look at it to put on any mitigating conditions that we feel may be appropriate. But it's very, very difficult within that framework, once you've established that underlying assumption that the use is okay, to just say, no, we're not going to allow it. We would have to have very good reason, and again, show that there are some sort of insurmountable nuisances that the property could create. Correct.
I think
Well, it's an institutional property that happens to have a residential, right, but it's an institutional property currently.
it was an institutional for
Well, it depends on the zoning district itself. But I'm saying, yes, they're residence halls or apartments that are essentially right next to your neighborhood, but they're part of a larger institutional use on the site. They're accessory to Concordia Seminary. No, it's just one big lot. That's correct. It's one big property. Yes. So it is already an institutional use. Correct. The Board of Aldermen would need to approve a conditional use permit under the current zoning for that. Understood. Okay, so let's get back to kind of the site here and the proposal, then we'll walk through these particular elements. It's really important for us tonight that you may be opposed to the overlay, and I understand from this conversation, some of you may be. We still need to understand with the overlay draft, the parameters that are out there where we might need to make some adjustments. Because at this point, we still plan on pursuing the overlay district. So I do want to talk about the individual regulations within that draft. And I don't know if you've taken the time to look at that or not. We've pulled out the kind of the key points here to talk about this evening, but it's really important that we get your feedback on those specifics. I think the larger overlay versus conditional use thing, as we're going through the zoning process to actually consider the overlay in a formal manner, then at that point in time, I think that's, you know, a debate that may pop up. But for now, we're trying to craft the best overlay district we can, and that's where we really need your input, being an adjacent neighborhood. So let me show you the rest of this, and then we'll start to talk about those individual pieces. So what we have here, and this is a little bit new, this wasn't in the last meeting that we had. These are some test fits that we had requested from Washington University. Again, they don't know the specific uses or the layout at this point in time. But what this shows, and I'll show you a couple here that are going to be a little bit easier to see, is how much of the site is actually taken up once you put a softball field, a baseball field, parking, a gymnasium, and some tennis courts on this particular site. So when you take those uses that exist in those other areas and bring them here, this kind of illustrates how they might be laid out on the site. Of course, this is assuming it's flat. We all know it isn't. So there's a lot of engineering work that would need to be done to determine what exactly that might look like. But these layouts give you some sense of what that site, how that site could be developed. So the really important thing that I want to point out for Tuscany, and it's important for Hillcrest too, and even the folks over in Southmore, we'll talk about these tree growth areas, and we talked about that in the last meeting along with the transition zones. This is kind of that tree buffer that already exists, that would need to continue to exist. But this shows, you know, parking areas, roughly the size of a baseball field on the site, the size of a softball field on the site, a soccer field. This one shows a gym building. This one shows a tennis courts that would be adjacent to Tuscany. But again, we're looking at that line to this area here is 80 feet. And you can see that it's beyond that. So probably 100 feet or more away. And so this just, again, shows how much of the site's taken up by those athletic uses. Yeah, and we'll talk about setbacks and transition zones in just a minute. And what? No, we don't. Well, it hasn't been engineered. Again, we don't know what the layout will actually look like. And we're going to have to deal with all the engineering, or at least Washington University is when they get to that point, to try to make it flat for fields. I mean, yeah, I mean, we could show you the current contours. We couldn't show you what their grading may be on the site. That's unknown at this point. Well, I don't know that that work has been done. This is what we have to work with, which is this conceptual layout. Sure. Yeah, be happy to. Yeah, we have that information. It's readily available on the county website as well. We'll either send you that information or a link to it. So. Sure, if you could, if folks are going to talk from out here. And, you know, the engineering stuff will have to be figured out. I would imagine the site would need to be terraced, though.
Yes, and that implies approximately 50 total feet of retaining wall, probably about half of it near the present Fontbonne boundary, and the other half at the south end near the Tuscany Park boundary, which means that the upper end would be carved into the present topography. At the lower end, it means we'd be looking at a 20 or 25-foot retaining wall facing our backyards. If you want to know what that looks like, go down and look at Menards. On Bruno, their retaining wall is 6 to 8 feet high. If you go on the little street, whose name I forget, that goes north from Bruno, you get something like a 15-foot retaining wall. Have a look at it. It's not what anyone wants near his backyard.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so let's get into the uses. Again, current uses permitted with the CUP, and we talked about this already. And this was actually read by someone in the audience, which is college and universities, provided that buildings shall not occupy more than 1/3 of the site area. and the height, location, and use of the buildings shall not have a serious and depreciating effect on any adjacent residential property. So that's what we currently have on the books in this particular area for universities. So again, the one thing I would stress is this talks about buildings themselves, not necessarily athletic fields. So the 1/3 of the site applies to buildings, and that would be things like, that any kind of maintenance shed that might be on the site, a gymnasium, press boxes, those types of things would be categorized as buildings. The rest of this, the flat work, the athletic fields would not count towards that. So those aren't buildings on the site. Accessory use, we do allow subordinate building or use customarily incidental to and located on the same lot occupied by the main building or use, subordinate in area, extent, or purposes to the main building, limited to and contributing to the comfort, convenience, or necessity of the occupants of the main building. As you can see, that provision is just kind of wide open. That's anything. We allow basically anything as an accessory use that goes to support the primary use on the site. And so when we were looking at some proposed uses, when we were trying to come up with, again, this kind of tailored list, the specific list of things that may go on the site, we wanted to make sure that any uses that aren't listed as approved primary accessory uses, expressly listed there, shall be prohibited on the site. So if it doesn't say you can do it, then you can't. So we can talk a little bit about a catch-all provision, and that came up at the meeting at the high school, and that's something we still need to tailor a little bit. So happy to talk about that. But again, if it's not listed, it's not allowed. All permitted uses shall be provided for students, faculties, employees, or patrons visiting the site. So if they put a small, well, they can't even put a restaurant or anything there, but I guess they could at South 40, for instance. But if they did, it couldn't just be Taco Bell or something on the corner that's open with a drive-through for the general public to just come in and utilize. It would need to be something that's interior to the site that's meant to be accessed by students. And then not in the Big Bend overlay. But I was just giving that as an example in the other overlay that we're building. I don't think this applies much to the Big Bend overlay, not as much as South 40. Uses providing services to the general public outside of events or activities associated with uses shall be prohibited. So again, that kind of gets back to the second item I had pointed out. But let's go to the specific uses. So again, the Big Bend overlay, very simple, just two things. First, athletic and recreational facilities, be they indoor or outdoor, or a playground. Those are the two primary uses that are allowed on the site. So I think there was some speculation early on, or some fear at least, when we were talking about building an overlay district, that somehow there would be something that would show up that would be unfavorable, or they would start building dorms there. So we wanted to really have control over what uses could go on the site. And you can see here, this is extremely limited to those two. The parking is right here, and that's an accessory use. So the parking garage would support the athletic use that's on the site. So we do have that listed as a proposed accessory use. It's down here, number 9. A parking garage? No. Because, well, if we prohibit parking, they'll park. People are going to need to park there. They'll park in your neighborhood. They'll park in. Okay, you're saying no parking at all? No surface parking, no parking garages. Now, well, if you're a visiting team or something like that, you're not going to have 100% of the people coming to the site. That's just not practical. We're going to have parking on the site. They will park in your neighborhood if there's no parking on the site. You'll have people parked everywhere if we don't provide parking. It's people are going to park cars. It's just.
Parking garages are ugly. The parking, because the parking regulations that.
Here, you don't have a microphone, but
Okay, go ahead.
no, we can bring one to you. I'm not trying to cut you off. I just, we're
Okay,
recording this and anything.
I believe that parking other than the amount that would be compatible with residential use should not be allowed to be built on that property. And the reason for that is that parking garages are completely incompatible with the character of the neighborhood. And because parking garages encourage have a strong depreciating effect on the character of the neighborhood, and because they attract traffic to the neighborhood. Washington University has shuttle buses, and if they needed to bring people there, they can use their shuttle buses and for small auxiliary parking or to bring handicapped people to the site.
Yes.
Has two parking facilities right there, right at the north end.
Well, that's actually being removed with this project. That's in this project area.
Well, there's parking all the way up and down. I mean, parking all the way up and down, Forest Ridge, Southmore, and they have the new one that's right there. I mean, it's right like perfect.
So can I ask you a question? Do you, I understand very much that you don't want a parking garage, right? Like that's even potentially visible at all from your neighborhood. And certainly not like directly adjacent. Are you actually suggesting that even like way up by Hillcrest where I live, if there was a parking garage there, that would be a nuisance to
I
you?
think a parking garage is intrinsically a nuisance. It attracts cars to the neighborhood. I believe when we look at what Clayton people believe in terms of climate change, in terms of responsible transportation, it is not for single family cars, and that 50 years from now, parking garages are going to be completely obsolete, and therefore Clayton should not be allowing new parking garages to be built.
Thank you. All right, so here are the proposed accessory uses that we have written so far, which is administrative and faculty offices related to athletics or recreation, athletic events, including competition and practice, auditoriums, band playing and practice. Commencement could be held here, convocation or graduation exercises. Concession facilities, gymnasium, health and medical care related to athletics and recreation. Here's the parking lots and multi-level parking structures, and we've received the comments related to structures. Student and campus lectures, speakers, musical performances, and other cultural events. Student and campus events with or without food. Temporary buildings, solar and wind systems. These are items that are already within our municipal code, permitted everywhere. So we just wanted to make sure that they were allowed here as well. And then finally, here's that catch-all provision that I think still needs to be tailored somewhat because we did have concerns expressed at the public meeting, which is any accessory use or facility that is common to a private university and deemed to have similar or lesser impacts as the uses listed may be approved by the Plan Commission. And that's kind of recognizing that we may not have captured everything here, and there may be something that's not a nuisance that's in line with the rest of these uses that may need to be considered in the future.
And I had a
Yes.
question, I'm sorry. You'd indicated that with Font Bond, the project was eliminating the parking lots that they already have in all those spaces. Can you elaborate on that?
So that parking lot's actually located on the, yeah, it's just the one that's located on the Concordia campus. It's actually right under here. Let me go to one of these. You might be able to see it a little bit better. Correct. Yeah, that's not actually on the,
There's tons of parking all along front.
yes, but Fontbonn's still operating through the summer of 2025. I don't think those would be in by then, but then Washington University will go in and use it for something. But I would imagine we would need parking on that side as well to support what they're doing. They're going to need parking on that site.
But if there's already a parking lot there and yes, they're acquiring the property, can we say, rather than building a garage, I know they have to utilize the space, but can we keep it as
Well, we
part
could-
of, can we make that
I-
stipulation rather than building something?
Yeah, I don't know that we know exactly where the parking will go on the site or that they know. Each one of these diagrams is going to show it in a different location. And this doesn't indicate whether those would be surface parking lots or a parking structure at this point.
I'm just saying that that is, the land is already there. It's already being utilized for something. It makes sense from a cost perspective and from an environmental perspective. It's already there. Can you use it? we make that stipulation for an overlay use that they keep it for parking if this goes through.
Potentially. Okay. Let's see. As far as the events that could be on the site, and we talked about this as well, anticipated attendance of 3,000 people or more would require a special event permit. That way the city knows that that event's taking place. We like to know that because our services support Washington University's services, fire, EMS, those types of things. If we've got a gathering of people, we like to know where that is. And you know, what's going on with that. Also any kind of traffic impacts, so we could alert the county that might be associated with it. If we anticipate everybody might be leaving at the same time. But then we do have a provision here that the events in no case shall exceed 5,000 in attendance. So to give you an idea about what 3,000 people looks like, that's typically on the low end of what we have for like our jazz festival that we have in Carondelet Plaza, those types of events there. So if you've been to those and you've seen that crowd, we're talking about a crowd of that size on this much larger site. Yeah, and the bands and any music would be subjected to the decibel limits that we would have in the code as well as the hourly regulations for that. So cutoff times. No, this is us. No, we put all this together.
It doesn't look like you're protecting your residents.
But we recognize that there will be events on the site. So we wanted to get a feel for what size event we might have there. And then we came up with an absolute cap for number of people.
Come to Washington graduation.
I couldn't answer that question.
They break it up.
No, we have Washington representatives here. How many people come to Washington graduation? Give the.
Yes, if you could. I mean, the question was, how many people are at Washington University's graduation? Their response was that it likely wouldn't be held on this site, but go ahead.
We likely wouldn't have a large graduation ceremony on this site at all. If we do something, it would be much smaller. And typically sporting events at WashU are never near this size that we're talking about here.
We could change those numbers.
You're asking for comments on stuff, we can't even see what you're talking about. We don't know how the land's gonna be controlled. Don't know how are you gonna protect Tuscany Park from all that traffic, vehicular walkers? It's, we don't.
Okay.
And that goes to cities, that goes for our property values because of that. That's actually ultimately going to hurt the city of Clayton benefiting from Washington doing this project. That I don't.
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance there. We understand that we have an institution here that's an anchor within our community and within the region. They're going to need to grow and evolve over time. I think there's some advantage to keeping the institutions that we have here within the institutional footprints that exist. The longest standing fear here, and the first thing I heard when I came to Clayton to work was I was, taken aside by some folks that were saying, hey, you got to keep an eye on them. They're gonna buy up neighborhoods. They're gonna start encroaching on everything. So this helps to keep the institutions within the institutional footprints. You also have other things that would come along with this, like the signalized intersection that I'll talk about in a little bit, that would be aligned with Oak Knoll, along with the new bike and pedestrian facilities on Big Bend that wouldn't otherwise happen. And that's a huge community benefit because that sidewalk isn't great right now. You only have two places to cross, which is Clayton Road and Wydown. This gives you an area where you can actually cross safely into the park where you'd be protected with, again, the wider bike and pedestrian facilities. Those are the types of things that are positives here. But in the end, it's trying to balance, again, we've got anchor institutions here that need to evolve. And is there a way to do that? And that's this exercise. Is there a way to do that and allow them to evolve, to develop in the future, and do that in a manner that's compatible and does not have significant negative impacts on adjacent properties?
Well, that sounds like a strong advocate for them.
It's a strong advocate. I'm a strong advocate for everyone. I mean, that's what we're trying to do here.
What are you doing
Yes.
to advocate for Tuscany Park?
We're trying to advocate for everyone. And so again, we could have just said, hey, come in and apply for a conditional use permit and we'll figure things out. That's how this thing started and that's what would have happened.
Not
and
really.
so we would have
I
tried to-
don't, I don't believe that. But anyway,
Well,
I think you're wrong about that, but I do think that,
I can tell you that I was in a
that this will
meeting.
have a strong depreciating effect on the property values of Tuscany Park.
Right.
And you need to take that into consideration.
Okay.
And that is a monetary damage to our community.
But it is important to understand that this didn't just, we didn't approach them and say, hey, we'd like to do some sort of overlay. This was, we'd like to put these athletic uses here and we'd like to start applying for conditional use permits. And we said, hold on, there's a better way. This is how institutions are regulated throughout the country. I can't find another example where any community regulates institutions with single-family zoning with one-off conditional use permits. So the thought was, let's get together with the community and let's see if we can find some sort of balance here where, they can utilize that site for the purposes they find necessary, but at the same time, protect the residents and lay all of it out up front so that it's very, very predictable for everyone involved what the rules are. And so that's what this conversation is. And had we not gone down that path or wanted to have that conversation, we would probably already be in public meetings trying to figure out what kind of conditions to put on this. This is something that, we will receive an application for it. It's either going to be a site plan that comes in under an overlay setup like we're talking about, or it's going to be a stack of conditional use permits. And so, when we start to get into the site characteristics, I think it's really important that everybody understands what the current characteristics are in the R1 zoning, which is a 15-foot set.
You're saying if every resident of Clayton doesn't want this, that doesn't matter to you guys? Have any kind of impact on this plan?
If I could just, as your elected official, I just want to say, I really am really interested in understanding the specific concerns that you have. And so I appreciate the ideas. No, I understand, sir. So if I could just say this, so I strongly believe in being clear about how this has impacts on the surrounding neighborhoods. I am in a surrounding neighborhood also. And thinking about what we can do to make it work. And everything I've learned to this point leads me to appreciate the fact that we have incredibly skilled professionals on staff in the city who are working proactively to help us take a proactive, systemic approach to these developments so that they are predictable. So it doesn't keep us, avoiding the conditional use permit process does not keep us from imposing conditions. It allows us to establish all of those conditions up front and to say what could work, right? So as an example, and this hadn't come up yet, so I haven't had a chance to ask David and Anna about it, but the consideration of how the land, the contour, the difference in height from Y down to the bottom of the property is super important. And the idea that there will have to be some kind of terracing and some type of retaining walls throughout the property in order for it to be developed. And so, what I would want to know is what are our options for establishing aspects of an overlay that would govern that. So my guess might be that a retaining wall can't be in the setback, but I don't know that. Let's check. Let's find out. Let's make sure that your setback is going to be as it is today and not like, it's not going to count as a setback if the retaining wall is right up against your neighborhood. Let's talk about whether we can set the maximum height of any given retaining wall at 10 feet or 5 feet or whatever, so that it might have to be really gradually terraced, or they might have to build hills or berms instead of like, big steep walls throughout the property. Like those are the kinds of questions that we can work with to really try to like maximize and the opportunity and protect all like our experience as neighbors of the property.
Sir, if you could wait for a microphone, please.
It gives a very blank check for a large development whose details are not specified, that will might occur over several decades and can't be anticipated. The advantage of the conditional use permit route is that any individual use, building, retaining wall, drainage channel, whatever it is, can be judged individually when it comes up. It's not giving a blank check. Giving a blank check's a very bad idea.
So let's look at some of the site characteristics here. The first one is lot coverage. So right now you can see the current standards that we have for the R2 district. So that's the current zoning that's there on the property. The front yard coverage, you can see is a max of 45%. But what I really want to focus on is the total lot coverage here, which is a maximum of 55%. So 55% of the site can be impervious under the current regulations. 60% with approval from the Plan Commission. This proposal would cap that at 40%. So I know there have been a lot of concerns about stormwater and other things. Lot coverage is how you mitigate a lot of the stormwater issues that you could potentially have. So you can see we've tightened that up substantially for the Big Bend overlay. And of course, recognizing that these are athletic fields, so we have that opportunity to reduce that number. So your impervious surfaces or any kind of roof you might have on a building or the parking surfaces on the actual site. But a pretty good reduction there to cap that at 40%. We also have a very specific provision in here that the site shall be designed so as not to increase the amount of stormwater runoff that exits the site. So the engineers would have to prove that out every time a site plan application or building permit was received. That's something MSD looks at as well. So we want to make sure that they'll have to study how much water is currently leaving the site and make sure that when all these improvements are finished, that number is not increased. So that's very specific in the draft ordinance. On the building height, under the current provisions that are there right now, the height standards are 2 stories or 30 feet, but that height can be increased to 110 feet when setback is an additional foot for each additional foot of height. So right now 110 feet, it's roughly 9 stories. So they could do a 9-story building as long as it's set back 110 feet from the property line. That's under the current R2 regulations. So that's today. That's in play right now. This would cap that at 6 stories or 72 feet. And again, you've got a setback in place of 80 feet for the Tuscany property line there, essentially. As far as site access, right now we don't have really any standards on how the site is accessed, but we would be very specific in an overlay district. You can see here for the Big Bend site, the primary access would be off of Big Bend. Again, that's aligned with Oak Knoll with a new signalized intersection. You would have vehicle, bicycle, pedestrians, all of that would enter from Big Bend because as we talked about, there would be a new bike and pedestrian trails, essentially, the nice 10-foot wide paths that would go the entire extent of the property down to the site. Secondary entrances, also on the eastern boundary, we would allow vehicular access from Concordia Seminary. And then we also have on the southern northern boundaries, you can see that we have a prohibition on the northern side. That's at Dartford there. That would continue to be cut off, but we would have an emergency access point that already exists onto the site. So if we needed to get a fire truck or something in, if there was some issue at the Big Bend entrance, we have another way to get in quickly. Yes.
The spot bond, which I know that
which I know we're told should not be considered right now, but as I understand it, the current student housing will have to be vacated in order for this project to go forward. In order to do that, that is certainly not going to happen in a year because they have to have a place to go. So I'm assuming there will be building, which in turn could delay the construction on this site. In the meantime, Fontbonne is slated to close in a year. Can there not be some consideration of the use of the roads, the entrances there, as opposed to putting additional entrance across from that is currently proposed right now? I've paced that from our property lines. It's a little over 100 feet.
Yeah, so-
That's pretty close. And I think might obviate some of the benefits of the the protected areas around the neighborhoods. I would just ask, given the timing, the delays, et cetera, that some consideration be given to making use of the current roads that provide access and egress already on.
You're absolutely
Fontbonne.
right. The Fontbonne acquisition does set up that sort of opportunity. One of the issues we have with it is the fact that the parking study is very clear that we're going to need a signalized intersection. And it makes it really tough with the Fontbonne site because you're too close to the Y-down intersection to have another signal there. We could try to move it down to the south end of the site to where Southmore is at. The issue we have is, and it's hard to see on this, Southmore doesn't align with Big Ben straight. It's at an oblique angle, and we would need to, or someone would need to, or Wash or somebody acquire at least one property at Southmore to straighten that street out to get a straight alignment. So there's some practical difficulties
Yeah,
there.
my
that are
my
really hard to
request here is
overcome.
really that just some consideration be given
Absolutely.
to
We-
the access egress routes in light of what will likely be greater opportunities than
Right.
if Fontbonne were not in play.
Totally understand. Yeah, absolutely. Transition zones. So again, this is something that's not in the code right now. So if you look in the R2 district, you won't find anything about a transition zone. This is something we've introduced for the overlay districts because we recognize that if we're going to have a use like this, it would be ideal to have a suitable buffer between the neighborhoods and the athletic sites. So this provides a landscape buffer between the institutional use and the adjoining areas. They can't have any buildings, any parking lots, any garages within that particular transition zone. This is supposed to be open space buffered between the two. So you would have landscaping and you could have a mixture of fences and walls as well. So that's something that you could probably talk to the university about as far as, what would be best along that particular border. But this does allow fences, walls, those types of things to be established. There is transparency of screening requirement varies kind of depending on where you're at there. But anyhow, the important thing to know is this is a very strict buffer between the residential properties and the institutional use. So again, as far as the map's concerned, you can see down here, this is the Big Bend overlay. This is South 40, and we're going to kind of focus on this. On the north at Dartford, it's 90 feet on this stretch. Along Big Bend, it would be a 100-foot transition zone. And then on the south, it would be 80 feet. And the 80 feet's taken from the existing distance from the auditorium to residential. So just running that straight across. Now, what you have in addition to that transition zone is that tree growth area protection that actually extends beyond 80 feet. So I'll show that again in a minute, where they can't take those trees out. So while your transition zone is shown as 80 feet, it's actually a little bit deeper than that because those trees have to be left in place. Yes.
What's the auditorium?
Oh, I'm sorry. The existing gym on the Concordia site. Yep. My apologies. Thank you. Good question. So here are the existing setbacks. So this is what the R2 district allows right now. You can see along Tuscany, there's a 15-foot required setback for buildings. So right now, if they applied for a conditional use permit, they could do earthwork, flatten that out, and put a building within 15 feet of your property line. That's under the current code as it stands today. Well, the conditional use permit is going to get into the characteristics of the use. You may do something with design standards, but it's very clear that 15 feet is the building setback. So that's your starting point there, which is not a favorable position to be in if you're looking for some kind of separation between yourself and what they'd like to put in. The proposed setbacks, again, 80 feet. It matches the transition zone along that Tuscany border on the south. And here's that gymnasium building, so you can see where that alignment actually came from there. As far as the tree requirements, we would require at least 20% canopy coverage on the sites. We looked at what's covered by trees already, making sure that we maintain that. And then we also got the established tree growth areas, and I believe that's the next slide. Here it is. So you can see this boundary here, this green line. Those are the trees that would absolutely have to be protected. So all those trees along your neighborhood would need to remain in that corner. Yes.
What is the present
That number. Okay, we'll pull that up for you. All right, some additional standards. Lighting, this was something we talked about at the meeting at the high school. We would require dark sky lighting certification. So this is a third party that.
Point out there's some protected,
Yeah, that's something that would need to be addressed through DNR, so that when they start to move dirt, they'll need to get permits for all of that, but that's where that factors in. There's Indiana bats that you see pop up in trees, and there's only certain times a year that you can actually take those trees down. That's probably the most common in this particular area, as far as a wildlife restriction. All right, the Big Bend overlay, again, lighting, so the dark sky certification would need to be met. And we can post some information or a link to dark sky as well on Engage Clayton, so you can take a look at it. But the lighting for the playing fields will be permitted from 7 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. Maximum horizontal light level at the property lines, again, is a half a foot candle. A half a foot candle is full moon, so you can't restrict anything past a half a foot candle. You couldn't say 0.3 or something like that. If you went out with a meter, they would be in violation if you had enough moonlight. So you got to set the standard at what the moon actually puts out, which is a half a foot candle. So if they submitted a site plan, they would have to give us what's called a photometric plan. That basically shows all of the light locations and then the light levels at intervals all the way to the property lines. And at the property line, that lighting, the photometric plan prepared by an electrical engineer would need to show that when you get to the property line, it's down to 0.5. So that's the restriction we have there. The height of the field lighting is 80 feet. So again, that sounds like it's really, really tall, and it is. But the reason you want those poles to be tall is it allows the lights to be angled downward. So you could go with 50 feet if you want, but as soon as you go to 50, you start to change the angle on that lighting outward. And that's what starts to cause issues for surrounding areas. So again, 80 feet looks like a lot, but that's actually a consideration that's a good thing. Tree canopy coverage.
So existing canopy is estimated to be around 25% canopy coverage. Mhm. This area, the area within the overlay boundary is estimated to be about 25% canopy coverage.
But the east end of the right hand of the part that's
So,
in the
yeah, if
overlay
you go to, can you go to one of the aerial slides? So the percentage that I'm listing to you only takes into account this area that would be under the overlay district.
that, the right half of that square is mostly open and the left half of the square is mostly closed. So, mostly covered. On the left half, the part that is the half that is closer to the.
We did, Yeah, so the density of their canopy is located in a certain area, yes. We also had them do, WashU did an analysis of all of the trees that are within 200 feet of the boundary line right now. So we also know within that buffer in particular where we stand, the nature of athletic fields, there aren't gonna be trees there. So what we worked with our landscape architect with the city is what is an appropriate percentage that maintains a high level? What's the maximum, but also allows trees to grow to their maximum healthy capacity within our targeted transition and buffer zones. And that's how we landed at the proposed 20%.
And I guess some of us would say, because the nature of athletic fields is that there are not trees, therefore you shouldn't allow so many athletic.
And then on the lighting, the maximum height of the parking lot roadway lighting is 20 feet. And again, the parking lots couldn't be located within 80 feet of the property line at Tuscany. On noise, currently we allow outdoor games and music from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. So that's the noise ordinance that the city has. This would be more restrictive on the site. That would allow outdoor games and music from 7 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. It would require primary and a secondary speaker system on the site. So the primary is the one with the PA. There's a game going on, you've got an announcer coming up to bat, so-and-so, that type of thing, along with the music in between innings and all of that. That would be the primary system. In times when those games, well, I want to talk about the secondary system. And so that's when a game is going on, they would use that system. The secondary system would be intended for practices and other things. So that would be a quieter system that it's at a lower level. Yes, sir. Well, so what we do is we cap the decibel level that would be emitted on the site. And you can see here at the property line, 80 decibels would be the absolute cap on sound, and then steady noise would be 70. So what we did was we went out and measured the sound that currently exists all along the property there. And you can see that data up there. It might be a little bit hard to read, but there's 2 points adjacent to Tuscany. It's this point, which is 0.2, and then 0.3. So when we went out and measured that, we found that the range was 60 to 85 decibels already. So Big Bend puts out a lot more noise than you probably think. So we count readings between 60 and 85 decibels during the time it was measured, and you can see the average was 76.9.
What's the sound from baseball?
I could not tell you.
If,
So you can see it was clear both of these times. We took them at peak hours for traffic, so we know when the peak hours are. So you can see that it took place at 7:51 and go ahead. You got crowd noise as well, right? Yeah, so that field would need to be far enough away from the residences, from the property lines, so that sound would dissipate by the time it got there to at least that 80 decibels.
and let's note, though, that 80 decibels at 10:30 at night is not the typical noise off of Big Bend. At that point, that is pretty loud for people who might have kids that go to bed early or who go to bed early themselves. So I have some concerns about both the interaction, if you will, of the 10:30 time limit and the decibel levels that
So
are
would you
presently
be
being.
proposing then that you have tighter decibel restrictions later in the day
Yes,
or at night?
yes.
If you have a neighbor, he's already a neighbor, right? Or she's already-
Hold on, if you could use a microphone, sir.
Then what if your neighbor started to cut his grass at 10:30 at night? Would he be a good neighbor? I don't think so.
Right, he would violate the ordinance.
Well, to me, this is the same type of annoyance.
Okay.
I mean, it's too late, too much noise.
Okay, so again, what we're trying to do here is tighten up from what we have right now, which is no decibel restriction. And then you can make noise from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. if you're playing games or playing music. And so what we're trying to figure out is what would be an acceptable level for this particular site. And again, what we know is during the daytime, when Big Bend is busy, we're going to have decibels that are in the range that we already have here. And so what you're suggesting is then adding an additional restriction that says after X time, then that decibel level needs to fall to a lower number. There's not in our ordinance, no. That's how it's listed right now. Well, I'm just trying to show you what's on the books and how we're trying to tighten it up.
Your students, they're, really loud, and it's going to be a lot more people at this site, and I can hear it at night. In the winter when there's no trees blocking it, so that is a concern. I think that's actually very valid. I know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very misleading comparison because you took a sound recording next to Big Bend and sometime for 3 seconds during the day, some driver honked his horn. So you got 86 or whatever it was decibels, but that was a couple of seconds during the day. At present, the area of the overlay that we're describing is forested and their children play their games there occasionally and, little kids shout occasionally. But it's really quiet. It's not a problem. It doesn't interfere with anybody, even in the Concordia housing, which right up against that little canyon. So to compare an unrestricted area where there is never going to be any noise anyway, because the only people who go there are kids playing little kid games, to what's proposed to have a stadium with 3,000 people and loudspeakers and blaring music is a very misleading comparison.
And again, this wasn't a one-off time. You can see the average there is 76.9. That's a sustained sound level over that.
The report, please, the engineer's report, so that we can evaluate how this was done.
Yeah, so we took this with sound equipment we took from another municipality. But
The proper engineer's report, which says how long.
we don't have a proper engineer's report. We didn't have enough time to do that before this meeting. So, but that's something. But that's something we can look into getting, but our lead time wasn't enough to get numbers for this. So we did the best we could. So we got good equipment from another entity. We went out, we took the measurements to get an idea of what currently exists. Because there was a prevalent thought that we had heard multiple times where, you're used to hearing this sound. So it's, the current level has to be like 20 or 30, I would think. So we wanted to go out and take a look and see what kind of readings we would actually get right now at peak times at these particular areas, and that's what we came up with. So
Several of us, the scientists, we'd like to see the graphs, please.
okay, yeah.
And I have a question too, fireworks, because I know Washington said about fireworks. I have a dog that does not like fireworks. So is that covered anywhere in this?
No, but that would be an easy thing to add. Okay. All right, so that's what we have for noise. And then finally, the traffic study, and I talked about this a little bit as far as the proposal for Big Bend. But the study was performed by CBB. They're an engineering firm that we've utilized multiple times here in the city for other projects. We did have them go out, however, and get new counts on Big Bend. So we've got peak hour counts. We've got all the latest data for what's going on at Big Bend and Southmore, Big Bend and Oak Knoll, Big Bend at Wydown, and Big Bend at Clayton Road. So we know how much traffic we have on Big Bend and how many people are turning and when and what that looks like on these other streets. We assess the traffic demand for the conceptual athletic uses. So we try to figure out how many people do you typically have at a baseball game, at a softball game. We talked about, events that may be on the site, gave that to the traffic engineer. And so they made recommendations to mitigate impacts. And we did share all of this information with St. Louis County, who controls Big Bend, and they concur and agree with the information. And so we would need to submit, once the specific uses are known for the athletic uses that would be on the site. Once that's actually dialed in, you got to send all that to the county, and they'll update, or you would need to send an updated study to the county. They would need to review that again before they would give any formal approval to actually put in a traffic signal. But on this preliminary analysis, they agree with these particular findings. First, that the signal's not warranted under normal conditions. So there's not enough traffic being generated to need a light there just on a regular day-to-day basis. However, if there's any kind of event on that site, so if you got a baseball game, softball game, any of those events that we've talked about, in order to get the cars safely off the site, you would need a signal for that. And so if you imagine, you know, you had 50 cars trying to leave that site right now, well, for 3,000, you're definitely going to need it. I wouldn't imagine 3,000 cars, but I'm just, as an example, just 50 cars on the site. If you didn't have a signalized intersection there, it would take forever for those cars to get off the site, especially if people are trying to turn left because they got to try to find gaps on Big Bend, which you know is difficult. And so you actually start to encourage dangerous activity, dangerous, you know, people just trying to gun it through there if you don't have that signalized control.
Why couldn't the police force handle that? Well, I mean, I assume it wouldn't happen terribly often, or am I wrong about that?
To put
Why couldn't-
flaggers on the street.
Why couldn't the police, why couldn't a policeman guide the traffic at that point at the end of an event?
Yeah, so we wouldn't want to bring in our officers to run overtime to do that.
But Washington University could be asked to pay for that, right? They don't pay any taxes, but they could be asked.
We
to
think
pay.
the signalized intersection is a better option, as does the county. And I'll get into some of the other reasons why. So first of all, you need it for egress to empty the site out. The proposed alignment as well is Oak Knoll Park. So that's where it would be lined up with. The signalized intersection, and this is why the county, one of the things the county really likes about it, is it creates that safe pedestrian crossing on Big Bend, where right now, again, it's Wydown, it's Clayton Road, and there's nothing in between. So this allows you to get to the park safely at the mid-block. Proposed left turn lane, again, this is something the county is very keen on. Into Oak Knoll Park, more so though, is the center turn lane that would exist between Oak Knoll and the Southmore South entrance. So right now, you know, that's not the case. So if you want to turn left into Southmore, if you're going north, you know, you've got to wait for a gap and cars start to stack up behind you, waiting for you to make that movement. This actually gives them a lane to pull off into. Traffic can continue to progress, and then they can safely make their left when there's an opening. That center turn lane acts as a left turn lane into this site for southbound traffic. So I'll show you that in a moment. And then during this analysis, they also looked at progression to see if you put a signal there, what does it do to the traffic on Big Bend? Does it make it where you have to wait through multiple lights? Does it impede cars and their ability to get through that area efficiently? And they found that this would not have any negative impact. Again, it would only be activated if a car was actually going to pull up to it and need to exit either the Washington University athletic site or Oak Knoll Park. Yes, sir.
Did the analysis look at Tuscany Park Road and how many cars come in and out of there?
Go ahead.
The analysis accounted for the traffic on Big Bend, but are you saying the actual traffic exiting and entering Tuscany itself?
Yes.
No, there was an assumption that was in the Big Bend, but there was not counts taken at that, just because it'd be lower volume compared to the rest of the surrounding area.
Wait.
It's accounted for, but not at that specific point.
I would note that the current proposed location of that road is about 100 feet from the Tuscany Park property lines. And have some concerns about the impact of significant automobile traffic on the neighborhood, noise, et cetera, et cetera. That's very close to the property lines, and it will not be very much mitigated by whatever trees are in that area.
And so to look at the alignments here, okay. If you could get a microphone, please. I don't know
Sorry.
where they're at.
The other thing is right opposite the entrance to Oak Knoll Park, there is actually a very steep drop off from Big Bend to the Concordia property. That means that either they would have to build a bridge. Is that the idea? Or else they would have to fill in that ravine, which would, number one, kill off most of the trees along there, and else I could imagine might not be terribly stable and, you know, you fill it in and will it really stay? So what's the plan there?
Don't know. That would have to be engineered as well.
Well, that sounds like something maybe that should be a part of
Well,
the
right now,
condition,
right now.
the overlay
so-
thing.
Well, so right now, we're just talking about zoning parameters for the property. I think we need to get this part figured out. And before, you know, they're actually going to engineer the site.
But I'm suggesting that you need to have engineering restrictions, which you start with the engineering restrictions, and then, you know, it's like you build a building. There are architects who think that you build something pretty, but no, you don't start with building something pretty. You build something that a building that will actually be strong and stay right and function right. And what you're saying is, oh, we don't have any of the engineering details. I'm suggesting that engineering details have to be a significant part of the overlay restrictions. In other words, they have to say, this has to meet such and such specs in terms of how geologically stable it's going to be, or, you know, what different things, what will it do to existing 50 feet trees?
Yeah, that's pretty advanced site planning. We're talking a little bit broader. This is broader zoning. You're getting into very specific engineering restrictions, which we typically don't have in our zoning code. To say at this particular point, this must be graded to this extent and have this.
But engineering stability, not moving. And
Well, sure,
going back to-
yes, and so, yes, and all of that they would need to get permits for all of that earthwork, and we would need to work through all of that, but you typically wouldn't regulate that through zoning. We're getting into use intensity and bulk primarily.
I have a question about the traffic there in front of number 1 Tuscany, which is the house at the top. You can see it in the map up there.
Yes,
So the traffic, if there's a light at Oak Knoll Park entrance and it turns red, then the traffic would back all the way up Big Bend, right? Yeah, there, that's
here you go.
perfect, right there. So,
just
so if
turn,
that light turns red and then the cars that are traveling to the right, which is what, north? Would back up all the way in front of our district there. You see it in front of our road, Tuscany Park.
you're saying that they would stack to here?
Yes, maybe,
They do every.
I'm saying that they'll stack all the way back to the entrance. You see the entrance of, yeah, Tuscany Park?
And how long the light will be stopped. One of the things I found is that,
And I'm just thinking through this like I think you are. One of the reasons you probably see significant backup today there, I would imagine, like people are coming to take their kids into the early childhood center in the morning and they get backed up there trying to turn left. And I would guess part of the reason is because the southbound traffic is not stopping to allow them to turn left. Whereas the presence of a signalized light there would actually be able to be set on an appropriate timer to allow them to turn left before they backed up that far. I don't know. I mean, that would be, I would like to know that we can validate that stuff.
There
from the
needs to be an
traffic study.
analysis of the traffic that flows through Tuscany Park and how do you get out of Tuscany Park?
So I would add the analysis that was done for the conceptual entrance looked at the intersection with the signal at this location. Considering all of the potential peak events that would happen during the evening, meaning whether it's 2 events entering, 2 events exiting, or 1 entering and 1 leaving. The queues for that northbound going to the right approach you described there, 95th percentile, meaning 95% of the time it's gonna be this length or shorter, are 170 foot at the maximum length down to 150 foot. The distance between Oak Knoll and the back property line of 1 Tuscany is 376 foot. So in the peak condition, 95% of the time, or less, it's going to be half the distance back to the back of 1 Tuscany or less.
Stack to about here?
Yes, probably a little bit shorter. Based on the analysis that was done. And they achieved that by modifying the signal timing at that intersection. They don't give it the same amount of green as you would see at Clayton Road. And that's how they maintain the progression along the route, so that it's like you get your signal call in for that exiting traffic, which they release over a certain period of time. It gets out into the flow, but they don't give it 2 minutes to exit. It's a shorter period of time to reduce those queues.
And I've not seen the plans and I apologize. The sidewalk in front of number one is scary to me. So how are they addressing that? Because it is very narrow. Students from WashU walk down there all the time. When I pull out and we all go out this way, I have almost hit students before, when they're it is too narrow. So are they going to address that at all? I know.
Nothing along Tuscany Park.
Okay.
There's scooters that come down there too.
Well, you're outside of the project boundary and I'm really not sure how you
Okay.
do anything without acquiring.
Can you
property.
talk about though, David, one of the things we talked about is, but my understanding or hope is that we're going to, have significant improvement in the sort of combination bike pedestrian path that you talked about asking. So that's what I'm asking him to talk about. So, and the idea that that would come along Big Bend and then be designed to cross and then actually like create a much better experience for pedestrians on the west side of Big Bend so that they would have the opportunity to do that, to like go down to Clayton Road and beyond.
I need to walk through, I need to walk there all the time.
Yeah, so really quick, just in case you need to visualize that. So we're talking about the shared use path or the individual bike and pedestrian paths that would come down really in this area adjacent to Big Bend. Then you would go across at the signalized intersection. So you would have a pedestrian level thing you could hit. It would change the light for you. You could cross on this side. And then the city, we could have discussions about taking up a similar path on this side of the street and then run that all the way to Clayton Road. So that way you got nice wide paths for bike and pedestrians for that entire extent. So again, you would come across here, then down, and then all the way up.
And to show, they're not going to want to
Unless-
cross.
Without someone acquiring one Tuscany Park and the county coming in and allowing those changes to the sidewalk there's not much you can do with that right away.
But that's something we need, the word used was balance. And I think that's a wise word. And WashU people, you're looking for balance, I'm assuming. Maybe I shouldn't. But that safety along there is a huge concern. Many of us have had car accidents. I've had students, young adults, I don't know that they're WashU students, but that have stepped out in front of me multiple times and given me rude gestures because they were insulted that I started to pull out and I didn't see them. We need to figure that out. And my experience as a college student was I would never say, oh, I'm going to go cross the street for a while, then come down and then come back. I'll go the shortest route, the most direct route. And we need to figure that out. And WashU, who cares about their students, needs to be very deliberate about figuring that out as well. That's
because Clayton took it away from us.
The county did.
Well, the county did it.
yeah.
Yeah, like, so the county did that and I get it, it sucks. Like, I hate turning out of Tuscany Park too. Like, it's scary and I only do it, a couple times a year. But I mean, I'm genuinely, like, you're there all the time, right? It's your space. Like, what do you imagine, like, that would make it feel better? Well, that it isn't, it's a problem today, right? It's not, and it will be potentially exacerbated by having more activity on this site, which is why it's really important to try to address it. But it's already a problem. It's not a problem created by the project. You're talking about your monument, your neighborhood monuments. Yeah.
lot of people walk by. Part of the native features, architectural features.
Just one comment. I'm a little concerned is with the acquisition of the Fontbonne campus, why are you having pedestrians and bikes go along Big Bend? If you, when we first started this process some time ago, we were told, don't even think about Fontbonne. That's off limits. You can't enter it. We can't use that entrance. Fontbonne doesn't want to be part of this process. Now WashU acquires Fontbonne. We're still going to have this pedestrian path right next to the traffic on Big Bend when it has this entire Fontbonne campus to lead these students into the fields if their fields are going to be there. But we can't consider Fontbonne because we have to let WashU think about what they're going to do with Fontbonne while we try to put this overlay district and speculate exactly what type of restrictions we have to put in and try to make safety. It seems ironic.
Well, let me say this. So when we look at from a city standpoint, when we look at the bike pedestrian paths there, we look at that as a public benefit for not just people from WashU that are going to this particular site, but for anybody that wants to go
Understood.
up and down the street. And so St. Louis County is going to require that you still have a sidewalk along Big Bend. You have to have a pedestrian way through there. And in fact, when we had a conversation with them talking about the traffic study, they were very clear. We still need a sidewalk along Big Bend. What is that going to look like? And that's when we talked about these larger trails that would be installed. So even if you routed, this campus traffic through Fontbonne, which is possible now, you're still going to have a sidewalk of some sort that's going to run along Big Bend, and that's what's going to carry people across. And that's going to be a requirement from St. Louis County. So our thought is that this is truly a public benefit, and we want the public to access this nice bike pedestrian path that gets them to Oak Knoll Park, which is an amenity and connects that to Wydown. We would prefer that that be closer to Big Bend. So I understand what you're saying as far as pull it off the street, but it will be a requirement. And if it is a requirement,
You have the
then let's
requirement.
maximize what we have.
Well, absolutely, but maybe also require if we're having a flow of Washington University students over to these fields.
A secondary path.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think that's off the table. We can have.
But again, this gets back to, we can't consider Fontbonne.
Well, I think.
I mean, that's
No,
absurd.
we can talk about putting yeah, we can talk about a pathway through it. What we're not ready to talk about is everybody always asks what's going to happen with it generally. What's the use? Well, we don't, that's unknown. But as far as a pathway through it, I don't think that that's a significant consideration. But to me, that's, I think to Washington University as well, it's probably a separate issue. Connectivity versus long-term use of the property.
Something I don't think anybody's getting, including our alderman, and I wish there were other aldermen as well here. And David, I don't think you get it either. And certainly WashU doesn't and doesn't care. Fontbonne has been badly treated over the years. Clayton used to own Big Bend. Then they gave it to the county, so it's now a county highway. Then the county highway took about 12 feet, the entire 12 feet of our whole western boundary, which left us with the 40-inch wide little piece of sidewalk that doesn't hold people walking 2 dogs. It doesn't hold people walking 1 dog and a bicycle and here's the problem. Our property so we've lost 12 feet. It's just gone. And there, nothing replaced that. We just don't have the space. So our north boundary is unmarried student housing, which is more dense than any other I don't even know what R4 is, but it's more dense than anything like that. Our eastern boundary is, what is it, R3, R4? So it's a little more intense. But our south boundary, it's the only section of Clayton, Tuscany Park, where R2 joins C2, which is a much higher density of commercial than anything else down Clayton Road. It's all C1. Where you go from Clayton Road all the way through the shopping, all the way down to Brentwood. That's C1. So we've got not only C2 next to R2, the only place in Clayton where that happens. Our C2 happens to be the highest crime magnet in the whole city, Walgreens. I mean, every week, well, probably multiple times a week, the police are there. So we've been affected badly on every adjacent corner. I mean, and now a sports palace. It's crazy. And at first we were talking about 300 and 400 people. Then at Clayton High Auditorium, suddenly it's 9-story building and 3,000 people, or maybe 5,000. It's just unbelievable what's happened in Tuscany Park, and more than any other neighborhood that's going to be affected by all this. Tuscany Park's hurt the most because of all the huge changes that have happened over the years, and they make a huge difference. I've been hit going out of there. I don't know what your traffic studies are, but it's 2 hours bumper to bumper in the morning, 2 hours bumper to bumper in the evening. You just don't leave Tuscany Park during those periods of time.
Please come visit.
I mean, I turn around in Oak Knoll Park. I'm afraid to turn left, and so I do, but I'm concerned. So we're gonna have an event, and students are gonna walk down the sidewalk because they're not gonna wanna cross the street. And they're gonna go to Schnucks, or they're gonna go to Walgreens. Oh, I'm thirsty, and that traffic from those events is gonna be worse. So if WashU wants to do something, they need to figure out a solution to that issue, that sidewalk. And I know that that is an issue now, but you're talking about changing something for the safety issue. Somebody's gonna get killed or hurt, and that is going to happen. So figure it out if you wanna do that, because that needs to address.
And it seems that WashU's they're bringing their campus from Del Mar all the way to Clayton Road now. They literally have. And they buy up all the apartments. Who knows what's going to happen down San Benito, how great for student housing and all that. But I think WashU owes Tuscany Park something. You're getting nothing but benefits. We need our wall extended. We need a fencing there. What's to keep all your people off our property? And 3,000 at a time, 5,000, it's ridiculous. And nobody's been more badly affected, no neighborhood in Clayton than Tuscany Park because of all the building. It's way more intense than any other neighborhood that you're going to hear from.
But just Aberdeen and Arundel, the west side of Aberdeen and Arundel are going to be almost as badly off by this, because in terms of the lights in the stadium and so on, they're going to be very, very close to. So it's not just 12 houses on Tuscany Park, or you can throw them under the bus, but there are other neighborhoods too, Southmore similarly. And if you did not allow parking under this conditional use permit, in fact, you would have a much simpler traffic use problem. In other words, if you only have the minibuses coming onto the property, then you don't have to have a traffic signal. You can have them coming in from the north of Fontbonne, and life is fine. And the students can walk, or the students can take their bikes. There's no need for anyone to drive a car from the WashU campus to what is now the Concordia Woods.
I hear your comment. I really don't understand. I don't know that it's practical in the end, though, to not have any parking on that site. You're not just taking Washington University students to that site. You're going to have people coming from other areas. You're going to have parents that are coming to be spectators. They're going to want to drive. It happens everywhere. They're going to park in neighborhoods or at Oak Knoll or in Hillcrest, and they're going to walk to that site.
Have you seen
They're-
how
they're not
many
going to-
people show up for WashU games?
But you're still going to have people in car. You still have to have parking on the site. You- So I understand, but I don't know that it's practical for a visitor to go somewhere on the Washington University Danforth campus and then take a shuttle to this site.
They can
They're
walk.
gonna make it easier, and they're gonna park in your neighborhood, or they're gonna park in Hillcrest or at Oak Knoll, and they're gonna take the easiest path possible. They're gonna park closer. Well, sure, but I do think if there's an event, it's going to be an issue. Those cars will come. We're gonna have to have parking on the site. I understand the concern about it, but we're going to have to accommodate that.
But you're really not understanding climate change, environmentalism. You're back in the 20th century.
Well, I
thinking
understand
about
all that,
cars.
but currently people drive automobiles and they want to drive the automobiles close to where they're going. We hear all the time that there's no parking anywhere in Clayton, and there is. You might have to walk a block or two, but there is parking and you can get relatively close. People are gonna find a way to get as close as possible to this site if there was no parking on the site.
But there aren't
going
even
to
that
happen.
many people who come. If you look at how many people go to WashU games, and I walk past their games on Saturday.
Well, yeah,
I'm suggesting actually at the moment, there are not very many people. So if you change the character of the games at WashU, is that the idea? That instead of having, if the games, okay, but then if you're not going to change the character of the games, then you can just say, well, typically at the moment, there are a few hundred people in the stands for a WashU football game, only a few hundred. And you don't, is that right? I think that's my experience. Okay.
if you could use a microphone, please.
We're talking about we're talking about Division III sports. We're talking about for a rivalry game. I mean, an intense rivalry like the University of Chicago type game. Not more than 200, 300 people, attendees. On a rare occasion, 200 to 300. And we're talking about, now you could, in terms of, you have to, it would be a rare occasion that you would get those types of numbers.
And it's maybe very easy to reduce the numbers, keep them way down.
Yeah, in the 3,000 person event isn't going to drive the parking requirement for the site either. So that parking study is going to look at what are the permanent uses on the site, what kind of trip generation goes along with those particular activities, and then you figure out how much parking you're going to need on the site. And a parking study, and you can read it in the draft ordinance, would be required for each phase of this project. So every time a new field is proposed for it, we would have to take a look at what that trip generation might be. But there will be some parking demand along with each one of those elements.
As this plays, given that it will take several years for the students to be relocated for Concordia, given that Font Bon will be closed by the time that happens, there will be greater topographic flexibility.
Absolutely. All right, we are already past time here. I do want to talk about next
Thank you.
steps. So we want to continue to gather community input through meetings like this. That engageclayton.com website. If you haven't been there yet, hopefully you have to look at all the materials for this. We'll upload this recording as well. You can leave comments there. And so we monitor those comments and we'll take feedback that way as well. So feel free to reach out to any of us, leave your comments there, however you'd like to do that. We want to continue to hear from folks on this. We're going to continue to work on these overlay districts. We do have 4 more meetings set up, so we're going to still talk to all the other adjacent neighborhoods, just like tonight, and get their feedback on this and see how we might need to tighten things up before it would go forward for any kind of consideration. So we still have some work to do here. Ultimately, in order for this to happen, the Board of Aldermen would need to establish the overlay district regulations, meaning they would need to pass something for the municipal code. The next step after that would be to actually apply these standards to that specific piece of property. So that's a rezoning. So when you hear rezoning out there, we're talking about changing a specific piece of property on the zoning map. So that would be the second action that would be required in order to make this happen. And then at the same time, those would be considered, Concordia Seminary would apply for a conditional use permit for their relocation of the housing. And the reason that they would be doing that just under a simple conditional use permit is that they don't have long-term plans or ambitions the way Washington University does. It's that project, and then Concordia will exist the way it's laid out for the foreseeable future. But the overlay, again, allows us on this bigger project to really phase that and plan it out. So that's where we're at in the process. EngageClayton.com. Again, I'll keep plugging it because it is really important that you go there, leave your comments there, access information. Every time we have information or a neighborhood meeting, we're going to continue to upload that to keep you all informed. So we're easy to find, we're accessible. If you have questions or want to have conversations, then let us know because we're still in that phase 1 where we want the input on it. So, and I've got a lot of good notes for tonight. I'm sure we all do. Yes, sir.
14-point overlay district thing you had like 3 slides earlier. Can any of that just be sort of crossed out? I mean, like big bands, can that just be crossed out?
Yeah, if you have if you have items on that use list that you don't think would be good for that site, then please send us the comment. Let us know. That's the feedback we're looking for. Is strike number 2, 4, and 8 off of there? That's exactly what we want to hear.
Yeah, can we just have a copy of that so we could do that? It's on the website, okay.
We'll put this recording up. We can put the PowerPoint up as well. The draft ordinance is up. I'm sure some of you probably accessed that already. So you can take a look at that as well. If you as a neighborhood wanted to go through and redline that and send it back to us, we'll take it in that form. However you want to communicate that to us, you can, but it's just really important that we get the feedback in the end. I'm sorry?
We already did that.
Okay.
Yes, number 14.
Okay. Is that what this is here?
It was like
Okay.
a general, the 14.
Which,
Oh, yeah,
what,
the
can you,
general statement. Uh-huh.
you mean 15?
That topic.
Right.
Want the general uses?
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
There it is, there was,
Yeah, sorry.
right there.
You're talking about 15, correct? The other uses statement?
About 15, not 14, which is solar energy. Yeah, okay.
Well, I would say 4 too, and I would say the boundaries should be increased between the North Tuscany and the start of this overlay district and with the retention of all the trees. And I would say less decibels, and just for the sake of my own sleep, I would say 1030 is kind of ridiculous for 80 decibels of noise. I don't know about your house, but if my neighbor were doing that, I'd go over to him. I mean, I think that what the Clayton regulation says about midnight, no neighborhood is going to tolerate that. No neighborhood is going to tolerate that. There's multiple things. I would kind of like to see actually what these lights are like, because if I drive at 6 a.m. up Big Bend, I can see, sometimes they have lights on the South 40 campus. That's 6 in the morning. Okay. So am I going to get lights at 6 in the morning? I can see those lights like the bright light of day. I mean, once this is built, we're going to be stuck. If we don't bring it up right now, we're not going to have any recourse. I mean, you're dealing with the big gorilla in St. Louis. So, and so I would say decibels, lighting, my own circadian rhythm. I would say traffic, safety, the egress and ingress. I think everybody's talked about all that stuff here. It's all written right here.
That's great. That's exactly what we're looking for.
Okay.
It's excellent. Thank you for preparing it.
Well,
I know you deal with that already. Okay. Thank you, sir. All right. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. It's very helpful.